With only 48 hours to claim his inheritance or lose everything to a greedy cousin, Elias drives his young daughter and his injured war dog straight into a historic blizzard. But when they finally reach the isolated cabin, buried under snow and miles from help, Elias realizes this might not be a gift at all, but a frozen tomb designed to kill them. With the temperature dropping and his dog unable to walk, he must break into the house before the storm claims his squad. What waits for them inside the dark timber walls? Please support us by subscribing to the channel to follow this incredible journey. The envelope taped to the door was not a surprise, but its finality felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was a bright, aggressive orange, standing out starkly against the peeling beige paint of the apartment hallway. Elias Thorne stared at it for a long moment, his breath hitching in his throat, before reaching out with a hand that bore the rough calluses of hard labor and the invisible tremors of a war long finished. He ripped the paper down. The words "final notice of eviction" and "vacate within 24 hours" seemed to dance under the flickering fluorescent light of the corridor. Elias stepped inside the apartment, closing the door on the world. The air inside was stale and bitingly cold. The landlord had cut the heat 2 days ago, a subtle nudge to hurry them along. Elias did not take off his jacket. He walked to the small scarred kitchen table and placed the notice face down, as if hiding it would make the reality disappear. A soft, rhythmic clicking sound approached from the bedroom. Ghost emerged from the shadows. He was a German shepherd, 8 years old, with a coat that was a striking mix of wolf gray and winter white. He was a large animal, but age and hardship had thinned his frame. As he walked across the linoleum floor, his gait was uneven. His back right leg favored the weight, a lingering souvenir from an explosion in a dusty foreign land that had nearly claimed them both. Elias knelt, ignoring the creak in his own knees. He ran his hands over the dog's thick fur, feeling the cold seeping into the animal's bones. "Hey, buddy," Elias whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "Rough day?" Ghost leaned his head against Elias's chest, letting out a long, low exhale that sounded like a sigh. The dog's eyes, intelligent and amber-colored, looked up at Elias with an understanding that no human could replicate. Ghost was a retired military working dog, a soldier just like Elias, and he seemed to sense the stress radiating from his handler. Elias stood up and checked the cupboard. It was a hollow echo of his bank account. 1 can of beef stew remained. He took it down, the metal cold against his palm. He opened it, the smell of preserved meat and salt filling the small space. It was not much, but it was hot calories. He poured the contents into a small pot on the electric burner. As it bubbled, thickening in the heat, Elias divided it. He did not take the larger portion. He took a plastic bowl and poured exactly half of the stew into it, then tipped the rest onto a metal plate on the floor. "Chow time," Elias said softly. He sat at the table, eating his half slowly to make it last, while Ghost ate with disciplined efficiency at his feet. It was a quiet ritual of survival. They were a unit, a fire team of 2, surviving in a world that had little use for broken soldiers or retired war dogs. The silence was shattered by the vibration of his phone against the table. The buzzing sound rattled the spoon in his empty bowl. Elias stared at the cracked screen. Unknown number. Collectors, usually, or the landlord screaming about the rent. He almost let it ring out, but a soldier's instinct, the need to know the threat, made him swipe the answer button. "Thorne," he answered, his tone defensive. "Is this Elias Thorne, nephew of Silas Thorne?" The voice on the other end was polished, firm, and decidedly not a debt collector. Elias stiffened. "Who is asking?" "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am an attorney based in Red Lodge, Montana. I represent the estate of your late uncle, Silas Thorne." The name hit Elias harder than the cold. Uncle Silas, the man who had taught him how to shoot, how to track, and then had vanished into the mountains 15 years ago, cutting all ties with the family. "Silas is dead?" Elias asked, the words feeling heavy. "I am afraid so, Mr. Thorne. He passed away a month ago. I have been trying to reach you. Did you not receive the certified letter I sent to your cousin Vincent to be forwarded to you?" "Vincent?" Elias narrowed his eyes. "I haven't spoken to Vincent in years. I didn't get any letter." A sharp intake of breath came from the other end of the line. "Mr. Thorne, please listen to me very carefully. Your uncle left you his property, the cabin, the land in the Beartooth Mountains, everything. He named you the sole beneficiary." Elias felt a rush of blood to his head. A cabin, a roof, a place where they could not be evicted. It sounded like a lifeline thrown from the heavens. "But," Sterling continued, his voice dropping an octave, losing its professional detachment and becoming urgent, "there is a stipulation in the will. Silas was eccentric. He insisted that the heir must physically claim the property by signing the deed on the premises within 30 days of the notification of death. He wanted to ensure the heir was willing to live on the mountain." 30 days? Elias looked at the calendar on the wall, a free handout from a local mechanic shop. "When was the notification?" "The letter was signed for by Vincent exactly 28 days ago," Sterling said, the anger evident in his voice now. "I assumed he had delivered it to you. If he has withheld it—" "He did," Elias realized, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles turned white. Vincent. His cousin had always been jealous, always greedy. He knew Elias was struggling. Why would he do that? "Because, Mr. Thorne, if you fail to claim the property within the 30-day window, the inheritance defaults to the next of kin listed in the secondary clause. That would be Vincent." The room seemed to spin. It was not just a clerical error. It was a trap. A calculated, malicious ambush. Vincent had sat on the letter for 4 weeks, waiting for the clock to run down, hoping Elias would remain ignorant until it was too late. "How much time do I have?" Elias asked, his voice low and dangerous. "The deadline is 5 p.m. the day after tomorrow," Sterling said. "You have roughly 48 hours. If you're not standing on that porch in Montana by then, Vincent gets everything." Montana was hundreds of miles away. A storm system was moving in. Elias had seen the weather reports on the display televisions in the shop windows earlier that day. "I'll be there," Elias said. "Mr. Thorne, the weather is turning. The roads—" "I said I will be there." Elias ended the call. The despair of the eviction notice was gone, replaced by a cold, hard tactical resolve. He had a mission. The enemy was time, the terrain, and his own cousin. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Ghost's ears pricked up, sensing the shift in energy. The dog stood, ignoring the stiffness in his leg, ready for orders. "We are moving out, Ghost," Elias said. He moved to the bedroom. The door was ajar, revealing a small room illuminated by a street lamp outside the window. In the center of the bed, curled up under 3 layers of blankets, lay Lily. She was 4 years old, small for her age, with messy brown hair that fanned out over the pillow. She slept with the total abandon of the innocent, unaware that they were about to lose the roof over their heads. Elias watched her for a moment, his heart aching with a fierce, terrifying love. She was everything. She was the reason he got out of bed when the nightmares told him not to. She was the reason he worked double shifts until his back screamed. He moved to the dresser. It was mostly empty, but in the bottom drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, was the dress. He lifted it out gently. It was a woolen dress, dyed a deep, vibrant crimson. It was thick, warm, and made with love. His wife, Sarah, had knitted it in the hospital during those final, grueling months of her treatment. She had finished it 3 days before she passed, her fingers swollen and tired, but her smile triumphant. "She will look like a little firebird in this," Sarah had said. "She will be warm, Elias. Promise me you will keep her warm." Elias pressed the fabric to his face for a fleeting second, smelling the faint scent of lavender and memory, before swallowing the lump in his throat. He could not break down now, not when Lily needed him. "Lilybug," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Wake up, sweetheart." Lily stirred, blinking her large dark eyes open. "Daddy, is it morning?" "Not yet," Elias said, keeping his voice light and adventurous. "But we have to go on a trip, a big adventure, to the mountains." "Mountains?" She rubbed her eyes. "Like in the pictures?" "Bigger than pictures, but we have to hurry." He stripped off her pajamas and began to layer her clothes: thermal undershirt, long-sleeved cotton tee, leggings, jeans. And then, the red dress. He pulled it over her head, smoothing the wool down. When she looked up at him, framing her face in that deep red wool, Elias felt his breath catch. For a second, it was not just Lily looking back at him, but Sarah, the same shape of the eyes, the same tilt of the head. The grief threatened to crest like a tidal wave, to drown him right there in that freezing apartment. He forced it down, locking it away in the box in his mind, where he kept the war and the pain. "You look beautiful," he choked out. "Mama would be proud." "I'm warm," Lily said, hugging herself. "Good. Keep that warmth." Elias moved with military precision now. He packed their entire lives into 2 duffel bags: clothes, documents, the few toys Lily owned, a flashlight, a first aid kit. He grabbed his heavy coat and zipped it up. "Ghost, heel," he commanded. The dog fell into step beside him, his claws clicking a cadence on the floor. They walked out into the biting wind of the early morning dark. The street lights hummed overhead, casting long, lonely shadows. Parked at the curb was his truck. It was an old, battered pickup, the paint faded and the body rusted in the wheel wells. But Elias kept the engine in pristine condition. It was the only thing of value he owned. He lifted Lily into the cab, buckling her into the booster seat. He whistled for Ghost, who hopped into the passenger seat, curling up to leave room for Elias to see the mirror. Elias threw the bags into the bed of the truck and covered them with a tarp, securing it with bungee cords. He climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door, shutting out the cold city. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, a defiant sound in the quiet street. Elias gripped the steering wheel. His hands were steady. The eviction notice lay on the kitchen table inside, a meaningless piece of paper now. They were not running away. They were advancing toward a new objective. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice sleepy as the heater began to blow lukewarm air. "Home, baby," Elias said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We are going to find a home." He shifted the truck into gear and pulled away from the curb. The clock on the dashboard glowed green. 4:12 a.m. 48 hours, hundreds of miles of highway, a blizzard brewing on the horizon, and a cousin waiting for him to fail. Elias pressed the accelerator. The race had begun. The town of Red Lodge sat huddled at the foot of the Beartooth Mountains like a collection of toys abandoned by a careless giant. The sky above was a flat, bruised purple, heavy with the promise of violence. Snow had already begun to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in hard, stinging pellets that rattled against the windshield of Elias's truck like buckshot. Elias pulled the battered pickup into the forecourt of the last gas station before the mountain pass. The engine sputtered and died with a wheezing protest as he turned the key. Silence rushed back in, filled only by the whistle of the wind and the rhythmic breathing of Ghost beside him. "Are we there, Daddy?" Lily asked from the back seat. Her voice was small, muffled by the layers of winter clothes. The hood of her red dress was pulled up, framing her face like a little cardinal bird in a winter forest. "Almost, baby," Elias said, glancing in the rearview mirror. He forced a smile he did not feel. "Just a pit stop. We need to give the truck a drink." He stepped out into the biting cold. The wind cut through his jacket as if it were made of paper. He reached for the nozzle, his hand hovering over the grade selection. He chose the cheapest unleaded option, watching the numbers on the pump tick upward with a sinking feeling in his gut. Every dollar was a calculation, food or fuel, warmth or distance. As the pump hummed, a sleek black shape glided into the station lot. It moved with the silent predatory grace of a shark in dark water. It was a brand-new luxury SUV, its polished chrome gleaming even under the dull gray sky. The vehicle pulled up to the pump opposite Elias, the size of it dwarfing his own rusted truck. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a designer winter coat that probably cost more than Elias's truck. His boots were pristine leather, unmarred by mud or snow. His face was smooth, well-fed, and currently twisted into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Elias," the man said. His voice was smooth, carrying easily over the wind. "You actually made it. I honestly did not think that old heap of scrap metal had the highway miles in it." Elias felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. "Vincent?" Vincent Thorne walked around the back of his SUV, his eyes sweeping over Elias's truck with open disdain. He was Elias's cousin, but they shared nothing beyond a last name. Where Elias was hardened by war and weathered by grief, Vincent was soft, polished by money and an abundance of comfort. He was a man who had never known what it was like to be truly cold or truly hungry. "You look terrible, cousin," Vincent observed, leaning against his vehicle. "Life hasn't been kind, has it? I heard about the apartment. Tough break." "I am not here to catch up, Vincent," Elias said, keeping his voice low. He glanced back at the truck cab, ensuring the window was up so Lily could not hear. Ghost was sitting up in the passenger seat, his hackles raised, a low rumble vibrating in his throat that Elias could feel even from here. "Of course not. You are here for the inheritance," Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. Silas always did have a twisted sense of humor. Leaving that mountain shack to you, and with such a strict deadline, it is almost as if he wanted to watch you fail one last time. Elias finished pumping the gas and holstered the nozzle. "He left it to me, Vincent, not you." "For 48 more hours," Vincent corrected, checking a heavy gold watch on his wrist. "Technically less now. The clock is ticking, Elias, and look at the sky." He gestured grandly toward the mountains, where the clouds were swirling into a dark, chaotic vortex. "They are calling it a historic storm, an early winter monster. The pass is going to be closed within the hour." "I know the weather," Elias said. "Do you?" Vincent stepped closer, the smell of expensive cologne clashing with the scent of gasoline. "Because I have booked a suite at the lodge in town. Fireplace, room service, warm sheets. I am going to sit there with a glass of scotch and wait for the storm to bury the road. And when the deadline passes on Monday morning and you are still stuck down here, or worse, frozen in a ditch somewhere up there, I will drive up when the plows clear the way and sign the papers." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Vincent wasn't just waiting for the inheritance. He was actively betting on the elements to do his dirty work. He had withheld the letter to force this exact scenario, to push Elias into a desperate corner where nature itself would defeat him. "You held the letter," Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. "You stole 28 days from me." Vincent shrugged, a gesture of mock innocence. "Mail is so unreliable these days. Besides, does it matter? Look at you, Elias. You cannot afford to maintain 50 acres of mountain land. You can barely afford gas. Do yourself a favor. Turn around. Go back to the city. I will cut you a check for $5,000 just to save us both the trouble. Consider it a charity donation." $5,000. It was enough to rent a new apartment for a few months. It was enough to buy food. It was tempting, in the way surrender is always tempting to an exhausted soldier. But then Elias looked through the window of his truck. He saw the top of Lily's red hood. He saw Ghost's ears swiveling, listening to the wind. This wasn't about money. It was about a home. It was about the fact that Uncle Silas, a man who had turned his back on the world, had chosen Elias. It was a mission, and a Marine did not abandon the mission. "Keep your money," Elias said. "I am going up." Vincent laughed, a sharp barking sound. "In that, you will die, Elias, and you will take that little girl with you. Don't be a fool." "Stay warm, Vincent," Elias said. He turned his back on his cousin and walked into the small station shop. He counted the crumpled bills in his pocket. He had exactly $42 left. He bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, 2 large bottles of water, and a cheap plastic snow shovel. It left him with $4. He walked back out to the truck. Vincent was already gone, his SUV retreating toward the warm, inviting lights of the town's luxury hotel. The coward's path. The smart path, perhaps, but the path of a man who had nothing to fight for. The wind was howling now, a mournful, high-pitched shriek that tore through the valley. Snow was accumulating fast, dusting the black asphalt in white. Elias knelt beside the rear tires of his truck. His hands were already numb, but he forced his fingers to work. He pulled a tangled mess of steel chains from the truck bed. They were old, heavy, and rusted in places, but the links were solid. He jacked up the rear of the truck, the metal groaning in protest. He draped the chains over the tires, hooking the fasteners on the inside. The cold metal bit into his skin, stealing the warmth from his fingertips until they felt like blocks of wood. He struggled with the tensioners, his breath puffing out in white clouds that were whipped away instantly by the gale. Ghost watched him from the window, his nose pressed against the glass, whining softly. "I know, boy," Elias muttered, his teeth chattering. "I know." He moved to the other side, repeating the process. His knuckles scraped against the frozen wheel well, the skin splitting, a drop of bright red blood welling up before freezing. He wiped it away on his jeans. Pain was just information. The information was that it was cold, and he needed to move faster. When the chains were secure, Elias did a final walk-around. He checked the oil, checked the coolant, checked the tie-downs on the tarp covering their belongings. The truck was old, but it was simple. No computers to fail, just steel and combustion. He climbed back into the cab, the warmth of the interior hitting him like a physical weight. He blew on his hands, trying to bring the feeling back. "Daddy, is the bad man gone?" Lily asked. She had seen Vincent, seen the way he looked at them. "He is gone, Lily," Elias said, turning to look at her. He reached back and squeezed her leg. "It is just us now, us and Ghost." "Is it going to be scary?" Elias looked out the windshield. The mountain loomed ahead, a wall of white and gray, vanishing into the storm clouds. The road was a ribbon of danger winding up into the teeth of the blizzard. "It is going to be bumpy," Elias said honestly, "like a roller coaster, but I need you to be brave. Can you be brave for me?" Lily nodded solemnly, her red hood bobbing. "I can be brave, like Ghost." Exactly like Ghost. Elias put the truck in gear. He engaged the four-wheel drive. The transfer case clunked into place with a solid, reassuring thud. He steered the truck out of the gas station, turning away from the town, away from the hotel where Vincent was likely ordering his first drink. He turned toward the mountain pass. The tires crunched onto the snow-packed road. The chains bit in, creating a rhythmic metallic clatter that resonated through the chassis. Clink-clunk, clink-clunk, clink-clunk. It was the sound of a tank moving into battle. As they began the ascent, the world narrowed down to the cone of his headlights. The snow rushed at them, a hypnotic tunnel of white streaks. The wind buffeted the side of the truck, trying to push them off the road, but Elias held the wheel with a grip of iron. He had no money. He had no home to go back to. He had 48 hours. And he was driving straight into the heart of a historic storm. But as he looked at the speedometer climbing slowly, Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. The uncertainty of the city was gone. The shame of the eviction was gone. Now there was only the objective: survive the drive, claim the house, protect the squad. This was a language he understood. The truck roared, defying the wind, and climbed higher into the darkening sky. The world outside the pickup truck had ceased to exist. There were no trees, no guardrails, and no sky. There was only a swirling, violent vortex of white that hammered against the windshield with the force of a physical assault. The headlights cut a weak yellow cone into the storm, illuminating only 10 feet of swirling snow before the light was swallowed by the void. Elias leaned forward, his chest pressing against the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather. The heater blasted on full power, but a layer of frost was still creeping inward from the corners of the glass. The truck shuddered violently as a gust of wind slammed into the passenger side, threatening to shove the heavy vehicle toward the invisible edge of the mountain pass. Elias steered into the skid, his movements precise and calculated. His heart rate was elevated, but his mind was ice cold. This was not a drive, it was a tactical operation. The enemy was the mountain, and the objective was survival. Beside him, Ghost was not sleeping. The German shepherd sat rigid in the passenger seat, his amber eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glass. Every muscle in the dog's body was tense. Suddenly, Ghost let out a sharp, urgent whine and lunged toward the dashboard, his claws clicking frantically against the plastic. Elias did not question the animal. He slammed on the brakes, pumping them rapidly to avoid locking the wheels. The truck slid, the chains on the rear tires clawing desperately at the ice beneath the fresh snow. The heavy vehicle drifted sideways, the rear end swinging out toward the drop-off. Elias corrected the slide, wrestling the wheel, and the truck came to a halt just as a massive shape emerged from the whiteout. A boulder, the size of a small car, had dislodged from the cliff face above and lay squarely in the center of their lane. If Elias had driven 2 more seconds without braking, the impact would have been catastrophic. "Good boy," Elias breathed, his voice trembling slightly. "Good eyes, Ghost." Ghost did not relax. He let out a low rumble, his gaze shifting to the left. Elias followed the dog's cue and steered the truck carefully around the obstacle, hugging the cliff wall. They pressed on. The incline grew steeper. The snow was accumulating faster than the wipers could clear it, creating a heavy, wet sludge on the glass. The old transmission whined in protest as Elias forced the truck upward, keeping the momentum steady. If they stopped on this grade, they would never get moving again. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. The only reality was the roar of the wind and the mechanical groan of the engine. Then the momentum died. The truck hit a drift that was deeper than the rest. The front bumper plowed into the snow, acting like a shovel. The engine roared as Elias applied gas, but the forward motion stopped. The rear tires spun, the chains flailing uselessly against snow that was too deep to find purchase on the pavement below. The vehicle sank, high-centered on the pack. Elias shifted to reverse, then drive, trying to rock the vehicle free. The tires whined, a high-pitched scream of rubber on ice, but the truck did not budge. "Damn it," Elias whispered. He killed the engine to save fuel, and the sudden silence inside the cab was deafening, immediately filled by the howling gale outside. He looked at the GPS on his phone. No signal. But the offline map showed the blue dot. They were close. The cabin was perhaps 400 yards up the logging road. In clear weather, it was a 5-minute walk. In this blizzard, it was a gauntlet. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small from the back seat. "Why did we stop?" Elias turned, softening his expression. "The truck needs a nap, baby. It worked really hard. We have to walk the rest of the way." "Is it far?" "Not far. Just a little hike." Elias opened his door, and the wind tried to rip it from his hinges. The cold was instant and brutal, stinging his face like needles. He stepped out, sinking into snow that reached his thighs. He grabbed the flashlight and the duffel bag with the essentials. He moved to the passenger side. Ghost was trying to stand, but as the cold air rushed into the cab, the dog yelped, a sharp, pained sound that cut through Elias's heart. Ghost's back right leg, the one shattered by shrapnel years ago, had seized up in the freezing temperature. The dog trembled, unable to put weight on it. Elias cursed under his breath. He assessed the situation with the speed of a combat medic. He could not carry both the child and the dog at the same time through snow this deep. Lily would freeze if she tried to walk. Ghost could not make it on 3 legs in this depth. Priority 1. The child. "Ghost, stay," Elias commanded firmly. "Guard the truck. I will be back. Stay." The dog whined, his ears flattened against his head, but he settled back onto the seat, obedient to the core. Elias opened the back door and unbuckled Lily. He wrapped her in a heavy wool blanket over her coat, creating a cocoon. "Hold on to my neck, Lilybug. Don't let go, no matter what." He hoisted her into his arms. She felt impossibly light, yet the snow made every step a Herculean effort. Elias lowered his head against the wind and began to trudge uphill. The beam of his flashlight was swallowed by the white void. He navigated by the faint depression in the snow that marked the road, checking for the tree line. The wind screamed in his ears, trying to push him over. His legs burned. The cold found the gaps in his jacket, but he felt Lily's small, warm breath against his neck, and it fueled him like high-octane gas. Finally, a shape loomed out of the darkness. A structure. Rough-hewn logs, dark windows, a roof heavy with snow. The cabin. Elias stumbled onto the porch, shielding Lily from the wind. He fumbled with the keys, his fingers numb and clumsy. The lock was frozen. He breathed hot air onto it, rubbed the metal with his thumb, and tried again. With a stiff click, the tumbler turned. He shoved the door open and stumbled inside. The air within was still and freezing, smelling of pine and dust, but it was out of the wind. He found a dusty sofa in the center of the room. "Okay, Lily," he said, setting her down. He gave her the flashlight. "You are the lighthouse keeper. You keep this light shining right here. Do not move. I have to go get Ghost." "Is Ghost hurt?" she asked, her eyes wide in the beam of the light. "His leg is just tired from the cold. I am going to give him a ride. You stay here. Count to 1,000. I will be back before you finish." Elias turned and plunged back into the storm. The walk back down to the truck was faster, aided by gravity and his own tracks, but the dread in his stomach was heavy. He knew the danger of hypothermia for an injured animal. When he reached the truck, snow had already begun to pile up against the doors. He yanked the passenger door open. Ghost was shivering violently, curled into a tight ball. When he saw Elias, he thumped his tail weakly against the seat. He tried to stand, but his hindquarters collapsed. "I got you, buddy." "I got you," Elias murmured. He dropped the tailgate of the truck to give himself a platform. He coaxed Ghost out. The dog was heavy, 85 pounds of muscle and bone. Elias squatted down, grabbing Ghost's front paws with his left hand and his rear paws with his right. Up we go. With a grunt of exertion, Elias hoisted the dog onto his shoulders in a classic fireman's carry. Ghost let out a low groan, but did not struggle. He draped his body over Elias's shoulders, pressing his cold, wet nose against Elias's ear. The return journey was an agony. The snow seemed to have deepened in the last 10 minutes. Elias was now carrying nearly 100 pounds of extra weight, uphill at altitude, in a blizzard. His lungs burned as if he had inhaled broken glass. His own legs screamed for relief. Step, breathe, step, breathe. The wind howled, mocking him. "You're too weak," it seemed to say. "You're just a broken soldier with a broken dog." Elias grit his teeth. "We leave no one behind," he grunted into the fur of the dog's neck. "We are a fire team, Ghost. We move together." Ghost licked the side of Elias's face, a rough sandpaper tongue that felt surprisingly warm. Elias focused on his boots breaking the snow crust. He counted his steps. 1, 2, 3. Get to 10. Then start over. Just get to 10. His vision began to blur at the edges, the gray creeping in. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Ghost shifted his weight, and for a second, Elias thought he wouldn't be able to stand up. The snow was so inviting. It would be so easy to just sit for a moment. "Daddy?" Lily's voice echoed in his mind. She was alone in the dark. Elias roared, a primal sound that was lost in the wind, and forced his legs to straighten. He drove his heels into the ice and pushed forward. When the porch steps appeared in the gloom, Elias nearly wept with relief. He climbed them clumsily and kicked the door shut behind him with his heel, sealing out the roaring night. He lowered Ghost gently onto the rug in front of the cold fireplace. The dog let out a long, shuddering breath and looked up at Elias, his tail tapping a slow rhythm on the floor. Gratitude. Pure, undiluted gratitude. "Mission accomplished," Elias wheezed, leaning against the wall, his chest heaving. "Daddy!" Lily cried out. "You brought him!" "I told you," Elias gasped, wiping melting snow from his eyebrows. "No one gets left behind." The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the biting cold of the unheated cabin. Elias knew they were not safe yet. The temperature inside was dropping. He checked the fireplace. It was a massive stone structure, but it would take time to heat the whole room. He needed a smaller, more contained environment, a tactical shelter. "All right, squad," Elias said, forcing energy into his voice. "Phase 2. We are building a command post." He opened the large duffel bag and pulled out their camping tent. It was a 4-person dome tent he used for weekend trips. "Inside?" Lily asked, giggling. "A tent inside the house?" "Best way to stay warm," Elias explained. He cleared the furniture to the sides of the living room. With practiced efficiency, he snapped the fiberglass poles together. He set the tent up right in the center of the floor, facing the fireplace. Once the structure was up, he filled it with every blanket, pillow, and cushion he could find in the dusty cabin. He lined the floor of the tent with the sleeping bags. "Okay, Lily, get in. Ghost, you too." Ghost limped into the tent, curling up instantly on the softest pile of blankets. Lily crawled in beside him, burying her face in his thick fur. Elias worked quickly to get a fire started in the hearth. He found some old dry logs stacked by the wall. He used a few pages from an old newspaper and his lighter. The flame caught, small and yellow, then grew, licking at the dry wood. The crackle of the fire was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. He zipped the tent flap halfway down to trap the heat inside, but allow the warmth of the fire to enter. He crawled inside, closing the circle. The space was small, illuminated by the orange glow of the fire through the mesh and the beam of the flashlight Elias hung from the ceiling of the tent. It was cozy. It smelled of wet dog and wood smoke, but it was warm. Lily snuggled into his left side. Ghost pressed his heavy body against his right. "This is a cool fort," Lily whispered, her eyes drooping. "The best," Elias agreed. He put his arm around her, feeling the steady beat of her heart. He reached out and rested his hand on Ghost's head. The dog let out a content sigh, the shivering finally stopping. Outside, the storm raged with the fury of 1,000 demons, burying the world in white. But inside the thin nylon walls of the tent, amidst the dust of a dead man's cabin, the 3 of them were alive. They were together. And for tonight, that was enough. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a bed of glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn logs of the cabin walls. Inside the nylon dome of the tent, the air was thick with the warmth of 3 living bodies, a stark contrast to the frozen hellscape raging just beyond the timber walls. Lily was fast asleep, her breathing a soft, rhythmic puff against the silence. She was curled into a tight ball, completely enveloped in a sleeping bag, with only the top of her head visible. Elias sat cross-legged near the tent flap, keeping the first watch. He could not sleep. His body was exhausted, screaming for rest after the grueling trek through the snow, but his mind was wired tight, a high-tension cable humming with electricity. Beside him, Ghost lay on his side, his legs twitching occasionally in a dream. Elias reached out, his hand finding the thick fur of the German shepherd's flank. He moved his hand down to the dog's right rear leg, feeling the ridge of thick, hairless scar tissue that marred the skin beneath the coat. The leg was stiff, the muscles knotted tight from the extreme cold and the exertion of the climb. Elias began to massage the leg, his thumbs working deep into the muscle, kneading away the tension. Ghost let out a low, groaning sigh in his sleep, but he did not pull away. He leaned into the touch, trusting the hands that worked on him. As Elias rubbed the scar, the sensation of the jagged tissue under his fingertips acted like a key turning in a lock. The cabin faded. The smell of pine and wood smoke was replaced by the acrid stench of burning diesel and pulverized concrete. He was back in the Kandahar province. The year was 2014. It was a routine patrol. Or it was supposed to be. The silence of the desert afternoon had been heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Then, the world had disintegrated. There was no sound at first, just a massive displacement of air that knocked the breath from Elias's lungs and threw him backward into the dust. Then came the ringing, a high-pitched scream that drowned out the world. When he opened his eyes, the world had turned white. A thick, choking cloud of dust and smoke swallowed everything. Sound off, Elias had tried to scream, but his voice was nothing but a croak. Silence answered him, the kind of silence that is heavier than death. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling through the haze, his rifle up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked for his squad. He looked for the Humvees. He found only craters and twisted metal. Then, movement. Out of the swirling wall of gray smoke, a shape emerged. It was not a man. It limped, dragging a shattered back leg, its coat covered in gray dust, so thick it looked like an apparition formed from the smoke itself. It was the patrol dog, the Belgian Malinois mix they had just rotated in. The animal walked toward Elias, the only other living thing in a blast radius that had consumed 5 good men. The dog stopped 3 feet away, bleeding, shaking, but standing its ground. It looked at Elias with eyes that held a terrifying depth of understanding. "You're a ghost," Elias had whispered then, falling to his knees to embrace the dog. Just a ghost in the smoke. Ghost shifted in the tent, letting out a sharp whine that snapped Elias back to the present. Elias blinked, his heart racing. He looked down at his hand, still resting on the dog's scar. That day had bound them together. 2 survivors, 2 ghosts who had walked out of the fire when everyone else had stayed behind. They had saved each other then, and they had been saving each other every day since. Outside, the wind changed its pitch. For the last few hours, it had been a low, mournful moan. Now, as the heart of the blizzard passed directly over the mountain, the wind shrieked. It slammed against the side of the cabin with a violent, percussive force. Whump, whump, whump. Elias flinched. To a civilian, it sounded like a storm. To Elias's fractured nervous system, stripped raw by stress and fatigue, it sounded like incoming artillery. Incoming. The logic of his brain tried to intervene, tried to tell him he was in Montana, in a cabin, safe with his daughter. But the lizard brain, the primal part forged in combat, screamed that they were under attack. The walls of the cabin seemed to shrink. The shadows cast by the dying fire morphed into crouching enemy combatants. The air in the tent felt suddenly thin, lacking oxygen. Elias scrambled out of the tent. He needed to check the perimeter. He needed to secure the sector. He stood in the middle of the living room, his chest heaving. The cold air of the cabin hit his sweat-slicked skin. Whistle. Boom. The wind tore a loose shingle from the roof, and the wood groaned under the strain. Elias spun around, his back hitting the rough logs of the wall. He slid down until he was crouching in the corner of the room, his hands gripping his head, trying to squeeze out the noise. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. Hyperventilation set in. His vision tunneled, the edges turning black. He was drowning in dry air. He was back in the dust. He was alone. Everyone was gone. A wet, cold sensation pressed against his hand. Elias flinched, his eyes snapping open, wild and unseeing. Ghost was there. The dog had left the warmth of the tent. Despite the pain in his bad leg, despite the cold floor, Ghost had crawled out to find him. The dog did not bark. He did not jump. He knew the drill. He had done this 100 times before. Ghost stepped into the space between Elias's drawn-up knees and his chest. He pushed his heavy, blocky head under Elias's chin, forcing Elias to look up. Then, Ghost laid his full weight across Elias's legs and chest, pressing him into the wall, grounding him with 80 pounds of solid, living reality. Deep pressure therapy. It was a biological anchor. The weight forced Elias's autonomic nervous system to shift from fight or flight back to rest and digest. Ghost licked the salty sweat from Elias's cheek, the rough tongue scraping against the stubble. "Ghost," Elias gasped, the name a desperate plea. He buried his hands in the dog's thick neck ruff, gripping the fur like a lifeline. "I'm here! I'm here!" Ghost let out a low, vibrating rumble against Elias's chest. "I know. I have you." Then a sound cut through the phantom noise of the artillery. It was not an explosion. It was a melody. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The voice was small, shaky, and incredibly pure. Elias froze. He looked toward the tent. Lily was standing at the unzipped opening, clutching her sleeping bag around her shoulders like a cape. She was blinking sleep from her eyes, but she was not crying. She did not look terrified. She looked at her father huddled in the corner, shaking, and she did the only thing she knew to make the monsters go away. "How I wonder what you are." She stepped out of the tent, her sock-clad feet padding softly on the wooden floor. She walked right up to the huddle of man and dog. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply sat down on the floor next to Elias, leaning her head against his shoulder, sandwiching him between her and the dog. "Up above the world so high," she hummed, reaching out to stroke Ghost's ear. The artillery fire in Elias's head ceased. The screaming wind outside returned to being just wind. The cabin walls stopped closing in. Elias let out a long, shuddering breath, the air rushing back into his lungs. He wrapped his arm around his daughter, pulling her tight. Tears pricked his eyes, hot and sudden. They were a unit, a fire team. He was supposed to be the protector, the iron shield, but tonight the dog and the child were the ones holding the line. "I'm sorry, Lilybug," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "Daddy just had a bad dream." "It is okay," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Ghost chased it away. He is a good dream catcher." Elias rested his cheek on the top of her head. "Yeah, he is the best." They sat there for a long time, a pile of tangled limbs and emotions in the dark corner of the cabin. The fire crackled, a log breaking apart and sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Eventually, Elias's heart rate slowed to a normal rhythm. The adrenaline crash left him feeling heavy, but clear-headed. "We should get back in the tent," Elias said softly. "It is freezing out here." "Okay," Lily said, yawning. Elias helped her up. He turned to Ghost, patting the dog's flank. "Thank you, brother." Ghost stood up, shaking his fur out. But instead of heading back to the tent, the dog paused. His ears perked up, swiveling toward the fireplace. He took a few steps closer to the hearth, his nose twitching. Ghost let out a soft woof, looking back at Elias, then pawed at the stone hearth. "What is it?" Elias asked, his senses sharpening again. He moved toward the fireplace, crouching beside the dog. Ghost was sniffing intently at the base of the massive stone surround, right where the hearth met the floorboards. Elias extended his hand. He felt it instantly. A draft. It wasn't the normal draft of a chimney. The flue was open, drawing the smoke up. This air was coming from below. A steady, cold stream of air was pushing up through a hairline crack in the mortar between two large flagstones of the hearth. The wind outside was blowing hard, creating pressure. If air was pushing up through the floor, it meant there was a void underneath. A basement? A crawl space? Elias ran his fingers along the stone. The draft smelled different. It smelled of damp earth, ancient dust, and something metallic. "What did you find, Ghost?" Elias whispered. The dog looked at him, his amber eyes gleaming in the firelight. He pawed the stone again, his claws making a sharp scratching sound against the rock. Elias looked at the floor. The cabin was built on a slab foundation, or so he had assumed. There should be nothing under here but dirt and concrete, but the air told a different story. "Lily," Elias said, his voice steady and focused. "Get back in the tent and get warm. Daddy needs to check something." "Is it a secret passage?" Lily asked, her eyes widening. "Maybe," Elias said, staring at the stone. "Maybe." He stood up and grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace tool set. He wedged the tip into the crack where the draft was singing. The phantoms of the war had receded, chased away by the love of his daughter and the loyalty of his dog. Now a new mystery lay at his feet, and Elias Thorne, the sniper who noticed everything, knew that this was no accident. Something was hidden beneath the fire. The draft coming from the fireplace was cold, a distinct ribbon of freezing air that cut through the lingering warmth of the dying fire. Elias knelt on the hearth, the heavy iron poker gripped tightly in his hand. The wind outside continued to batter the cabin walls, a relentless siege of noise, but Elias's focus had narrowed to the hairline crack in the mortar between the large flagstones. "Stay in the tent, Lily," Elias commanded softly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not come out until I say so." "Okay, Daddy," came the muffled reply from inside the nylon dome. Elias turned to Ghost. The German shepherd was sitting at alert, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, ignoring the stiffness in his injured leg. "Ghost, watch," Elias whispered, pointing to the tent. The dog limped over to the entrance of the tent and lay down, placing his body between the unknown threat of the fireplace and the child. It was a standard operating procedure: secure the asset. Elias turned back to the stone. He jammed the tip of the poker into the crack and leaned his weight against it. The mortar, old and brittle, crumbled with a sound like grinding teeth. The large flagstone shifted. It was not cemented down. It was merely resting there, heavy and precise. With a grunt of exertion, Elias worked his fingers under the edge of the stone. The muscles in his back strained as he heaved upward. The stone was incredibly heavy, slate gray and thick, but it pivoted on a hidden steel hinge that had been expertly set into the masonry. With a low, grinding rumble, the stone slab rose, revealing a dark, square aperture beneath. Elias grabbed his flashlight and shone the beam into the hole. It was not a jagged crawl space dug into the dirt. It was a constructed shaft. Concrete walls, smooth and gray, descended about 8 feet. A sturdy steel ladder was bolted to the side. The air that wafted up was stale and smelled of earth, oil, and dry paper. It smelled like a bunker. Elias checked his perimeter one last time. Ghost was vigilant. The cabin door was bolted. He swung his legs into the hole, finding the rungs of the ladder with his boots. He descended slowly, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. When his feet touched the concrete floor, he swept the light around. The space was small, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. It was cold, essentially a root cellar that had been reinforced and repurposed. Along the walls stood rows of metal shelving units, industrial and severe. Elias expected to find canned food. Silas was a survivalist. It would make sense to hoard beans and rice for the end of the world. Instead, the shelves were lined with military-grade ammunition cans. They were painted olive drab, the paint chipped in places, the metal handles rusted with age. There were dozens of them, stacked with military precision, labels facing out. But the labels had been painted over. Elias approached the nearest shelf. He reached out and unlatched the heavy clamp of an ammo can. The metal snapped open with a sharp, echoing report that made him flinch. He lifted the heavy lid. He expected the dull brass of rifle cartridges. He found the heavy, impossible yellow of gold. Elias stared. His brain refused to process the visual information. He reached in and picked up a single bar. It was small, heavy, and cool to the touch. It was a kilobar, stamped with a refinery mark and a serial number. He shone the light into the can. It was full, rows of them. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, not with greed, but with a sudden, crushing fear. He closed the lid and opened the next can. Stacks of cash, bundles of $100 bills, vacuum-sealed in heavy plastic to protect them from moisture and rot. The bills looked old, the design from the 1990s. He opened another can, more gold, American Gold Eagles, Krugerrands. Elias backed away until his back hit the cold concrete wall. He ran a hand over his face, his breath coming in short, white puffs in the frigid air. This was not an inheritance. This was a liability. This was dangerous. In his mind, large sums of hidden cash and gold only meant one thing: criminal activity. Was Silas a thief? A smuggler? If this money was dirty, Elias could not touch it. If the authorities found this, he would go to prison. If men like Vincent knew about this, they would kill for it. "Silas, what did you do?" Elias whispered to the empty room. "What kind of curse did you leave me?" He scanned the room again, looking for answers, looking for the drugs or the weapons that usually accompanied this kind of hoard. On a small metal desk in the corner, sitting alone under a layer of dust, was a thick, leather-bound book. Elias walked over and opened it. It was a ledger. The handwriting was spidery and cramped, but meticulous. It was Silas's hand. Elias remembered it from the birthday cards he used to receive 20 years ago. He began to read. The entries went back decades. October 14th, 1974. Wages from Red Dog Mine, $450. Purchase, 3 ounces gold. November 02, 1978. Overtime pay, $200. Purchase, savings bond. June 12, 1985. Settlement from injury, $15,000. Purchase, bullion. Page after page, year after year. Every single dollar was accounted for. Every ounce of gold had a corresponding receipt stapled to the page. There were notes in the margins, commentary on the price of gold, the state of the economy, the fear of banks failing. Elias turned the pages, his eyes scanning the dates. 1990, 2005, 2015. It was not stolen. It was not drug money. It was the life's work of a man who had worked himself to the bone in the mines, who had lived like a pauper, eating beans and wearing rags, saving every single penny he earned. It was 40 years of isolation and paranoid frugality condensed into this cold concrete room. The legality of it was indisputable. The ledger proved the provenance of every single gram. It was clean. It was legally Elias's. The fear in Elias's chest began to loosen, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. He looked around the room not as a crime scene, but as a tomb. Silas had built this empire of metal and paper, and he had died alone above it. He had saved for a future that never came. Elias closed the ledger gently. As he did, his flashlight beam caught a small wooden box sitting on the corner of the desk, overshadowed by the wealth around it. It was a simple cigar box worn at the edges. Elias opened it. Inside, there was no gold. There was no money. Lying on a bed of cotton was a set of dog tags. They were old, the matte finish rubbed smooth in places by the friction of skin and cloth. The chain was beaded steel, darkened by time. Elias picked them up. The metal chimed softly, a sound that every soldier knows in their soul. He ran his thumb over the embossed letters. Thorn, Silas, U.S. Army, Apios, no pref. Underneath the tags lay a folded piece of paper. Elias unfolded it. It was a discharge paper. Honorable discharge. Vietnam, 1969. And beneath that, a Silver Star citation for gallantry in action. Elias had known Silas was a veteran, but Silas had never spoken of it. He had buried that part of his life just as he had buried this bunker. Elias reached up to his own neck. He pulled out his own dog tags, the ones he had never taken off since the day he left the Marine Corps. They were warm from his body heat. He looked at Silas's tags, cold and forgotten. Then he looked at his own. 2 men. Same blood, same war, just different years. Both of them had come home to a world that didn't quite understand them. Both of them had retreated, Silas to the mountains, Elias to the shell of his own mind. Slowly, reverently, Elias undid the clasp of the chain holding Silas's tags. He looped the old dark chain around his own neck. He fastened it. The cold metal of Silas's tags settled against his skin, clicking against his own. The weight was negligible, a few ounces at most, but to Elias it felt heavy with meaning. He was not alone in this cabin. He was not just a nephew inheriting a house. He was a soldier relieving another soldier of his watch. "I've got the watch, Uncle Silas," Elias whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Rest easy. I've got the watch." He stood there for a long moment in the silence of the bunker, the gold and the money forgotten. The true inheritance was hanging around his neck. It was the connection of shared sacrifice, the silent brotherhood of those who had seen the elephant and survived. Above him, he heard the heavy thump of Ghost moving across the floorboards, followed by the high-pitched giggle of Lily. Elias looked up at the square of light. He had a mission. He had the resources now to fight Vincent, to fight the eviction, to fight the world if he had to. He had the ledger to protect them legally. He had the gold to protect them financially, and he had the dog tags to remind him of who he was. He was not a victim. He was a thorn. He was a Marine. Elias closed the cigar box and slipped the ledger under his jacket, pressing it tight against his ribs. He climbed the ladder, emerging from the tomb of the past back into the firelight of the present, ready to fight for the future. Elias climbed out of the bunker, the cool weight of Silas's dog tag settling against his chest, next to his own. The living room was warmer now, the fire crackling with renewed vigor. He replaced the heavy flagstone, ensuring it sat flush with the rest of the hearth, concealing the secret beneath the floor. He moved to the metal desk in the corner of the room, the one place he hadn't thoroughly searched yet. The bunker held the treasure, but Elias needed something more immediate. He needed a weapon to fight the war that was waiting for him when the sun came up. He opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a heavy Pelican-style waterproof case. It was orange, bright and jarring against the dark wood. Beside it lay a thick manila envelope, sealed with red wax. Elias lifted the case onto the desk. He snapped the latches open. Inside sat a satellite phone. It was a rugged black brick of technology, looking robust enough to survive a bomb blast. Beside it was a solar charger and a spare battery. Silas, ever the paranoid survivalist, had prepared for the day the grid went down, or perhaps the day his nephew would be trapped in a blizzard with no cell service. Elias powered it on. The screen flickered to life, glowing green in the dim room. It searched for a signal, the bars blinking slowly. 1 bar, 2 bars. Connection established. He set the phone down and picked up the envelope. He broke the wax seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a legal contract. Elias scanned the header. Retainer agreement. Sterling, Vance, and Partners. He knew the name. It was not a small-town office. It was one of the most aggressive, high-profile law firms in the state capital. The document was dated 5 years ago. It was fully executed, signed by Silas Thorne. He turned to the payment schedule attached to the back. The numbers made Elias blink. Silas had paid a retainer fee of $50,000, prepaid, non-refundable. The scope of representation was listed simply as comprehensive legal defense and estate protection for the designated beneficiary. "You knew," Elias whispered, his fingers tracing the signature. "You knew they would come for it." This was not just a lawyer on speed dial. This was a paid-for loaded gun pointed directly at Vincent. Silas had not just left him gold, he had left him an army of suits to protect it. Elias picked up the satellite phone. He pulled the business card for Arthur Sterling from his pocket, the one the lawyer had texted him a picture of days ago, which he had saved to his phone before the service died. He dialed the number on the keypad. The line rang. Once, twice. "Sterling speaking." The voice was groggy. It was late, long past business hours. "Mr. Sterling, this is Elias Thorne." There was a pause, the sound of rustling sheets on the other end. "Mr. Thorne, how are you calling me? The lines are down all over the county. The storm is a monster." "I am calling from a satellite phone I found in Silas's desk," Elias said, his voice steady and authoritative. "I am at the cabin. I am on the property." "You made it?" Sterling's voice lost its sleepiness, replaced by genuine shock. "In this weather? That is impressive." "I am securing the asset," Elias said, slipping into military vernacular. But I need you to execute the next phase. I found the retainer agreement, the one Silas signed with your firm." "Ah," Sterling said, a note of professional satisfaction entering his tone. "The SHIELD protocol. Silas said you would find it if you were resourceful enough. I want to activate it, immediately." "Consider it done, Mr. Thorne. What are your instructions?" "Vincent is at the hotel in town," Elias said. "He intentionally withheld the notification letter to run out the clock. He plans to come up here the moment the road's clear with a court order or the sheriff to claim the property by default." "He withheld the letter?" Sterling sounded delighted, like a shark smelling blood. "That is bad faith. That is fraud. If we can prove that?" "We will handle the proof later. Right now, I need you to file an injunction. I am physically present. I have claimed the inheritance within the 48-hour window remaining. I want you to notify the county clerk, the sheriff's office, and Vincent's legal counsel immediately. Block him. If he steps foot on this driveway tomorrow, I want him arrested for trespassing." "I will wake up a judge," Sterling promised. "I will have the paperwork filed electronically within the hour. By the time the sun comes up, Vincent will be buried in so much red tape he won't be able to breathe without a permit. You stay put, Elias. Keep the doors locked. You are the legal owner of that land as of this phone call. I am logging the time and location of this call as proof of occupancy." "Thank you, Sterling. Out." Elias ended the call. He let out a long breath. The first shot had been fired, and it was a direct hit. Vincent thought he was fighting a broke, desperate man. He had no idea he was fighting a fully funded legal fortress. Elias turned back to the envelope. There was one more thing inside, a handwritten letter. The paper was old, slightly yellowed. The handwriting was the same spidery scrawl from the ledger. "To Elias, if you are reading this, you made it. You beat the storm, you beat the vultures, and most importantly, you beat your own doubts. I know you must be angry with me. I know you are wondering why, if I had all this, the gold, the money, the lawyers, I let you struggle. I watched you, Elias. I had a private investigator keep tabs on you for years. I saw you lose Sarah. I saw you fight the VA for your benefits. I saw you working double shifts at the warehouse just to buy that little girl a decent pair of shoes." Elias's vision blurred. He sat down heavily in the desk chair. "I could have sent you a check. I could have paid off your debts. But I didn't. Not because I didn't love you, but because I was terrified. This money, it is a weight, Elias. It ruined me. It made me suspicious, lonely, and hard. I sat on a pile of gold and ate cold beans because I was too afraid to trust anyone. I was afraid that if I gave it to you when you were young or when you were hurting, it would ruin you too. I was afraid you would become like Vincent, soft, entitled, thinking the world owed you something. Or worse, you would become like me, a dragon guarding a cave with no fire left in his heart. So I waited. I waited to see if the war would break you. It didn't. I waited to see if the grief would turn you bitter. It didn't. I watched you raise that girl with gentleness, even when your own hands were shaking. I watched you give your last dollar to a beggar, even when your own belly was empty." Elias wiped a tear from his cheek, his hand trembling. "I waited until you had nothing left but your dignity. Because a man who keeps his dignity when the world has taken everything else, that is a man who can be trusted with a fortune. You are a soldier, Elias. You know the value of things is not in their price, but in the sacrifice it takes to hold them. The gold is not the gift. The house is not the gift. The gift is the trust. I trust you, Elias. You are the better version of us. You are the Thorn who didn't run away. Protect the girl, protect the dog, and for God's sake, buy yourself a decent steak. Semper Fi, nephew, Uncle Silas." Elias lowered the letter. A sob ripped through his chest, sudden and violent. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, trying to stem the flow, but the dam had broken. For years he had felt abandoned. He had felt like the world had chewed him up and spit him out. He had felt invisible, struggling in the dark, thinking no one saw his pain, no one saw his effort. Silas had seen. Silas had. Silas hadn't abandoned him. He had been waiting. He had been testing him, not with cruelty, but with a strange, hard love. He had wanted to make sure Elias's soul was ironclad before he handed him the sword. "You stubborn old bastard," Elias choked out, a tear splashing onto the dusty desk. A smile broke through the grief, painful but genuine. He felt a wet nose press against his knee. Ghost had come over from the tent. The dog sat down, leaning his weight against Elias's leg, his amber eyes looking up with quiet concern. Elias reached down and hugged the dog, burying his face in the thick fur of Ghost's neck. He cried for the years of struggle. He cried for the relief of safety. But mostly he cried because for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt worthy. "We are okay, Ghost," Elias whispered into the fur, his voice thick. "We made it." He stood up, folding the letter carefully and placing it in his pocket, right next to his heart. He walked over to the tent. Lily was fast asleep, one arm thrown over her head, her mouth slightly open. She looked peaceful, safe. Elias sat down in the armchair by the fire, the satellite phone on his lap, the dog tags warm against his skin. Outside, the wind howled, battering the cabin, trying to find a way in. But the walls held. The fire burned, and Elias Thorne, armed with the shield of the departed, settled in to wait for the dawn. He was ready for them now. Let Vincent come. Let the storm rage. The soldier had dug in, and he was not moving an inch. The storm howled its fury through the night, a relentless onslaught of wind and snow. Inside the cabin, however, a fragile peace had settled. The tent glowed with the soft light of Elias's flashlight, casting a warm circle of safety against the cold, dark room. Lily slept soundly, nestled against Ghost's warm fur. Elias sat by the fire, reading the old ledger, making sense of Silas's meticulous records. The crackle of the flames was a soothing counterpoint to the raging blizzard outside. He had fallen into a light, fitful sleep in the armchair, the ledger still open on his lap, when a new sound cut through the drone of the wind. It was a low, mechanical hum, growing steadily louder. It was too deep for a car, too distinct for just the storm. Elias's head snapped up, instantly awake. Ghost, who had been dozing beside him, lifted his head, his ears swiveling. A low growl rumbled in the dog's chest, a deep vibrating sound that bespoke suspicion. The hum grew into a roar, then the unmistakable thrum of an engine. It was a snowmobile. Elias sprang to his feet, pulling the old rifle from the corner where Silas had left it. It was a heavy bolt action, well maintained, but Elias gripped it with the practiced ease of someone who understood its deadly purpose. He moved silently to the front window, pressing himself against the wall. The snowmobile pulled to a stop just outside the cabin, its headlight cutting a bright beam through the lingering whiteout. A figure, bundled in heavy winter gear, dismounted. The engine sputtered, then died, leaving an eerie silence that felt heavier than the storm. The figure stood for a moment, looking at the cabin. Elias peered through a gap in the heavy curtains. He couldn't make out the face, but the man was stocky, with broad shoulders, and moved with an easy confidence that suggested familiarity with the harsh mountain environment. Then the man raised a gloved hand and knocked once, sharply, on the cabin door. Elias did not answer. He held his breath, the rifle raised. He checked the safety. "Elias!" a gruff voice called out, carrying faintly over the wind. "Elias Thorne! It's Mac O'Malley, Silas's friend!" Elias lowered the rifle slightly, but did not relax. He didn't know a Mac. "I saw your truck down on the road," Mac yelled again. "The sheriff called me, said a fool was trying to drive up the pass in this weather. Thought it might be Silas, but then he said there was a kid and a dog. Knew it had to be you." Elias hesitated. Sheriff Miller. He had mentioned Mac. That made sense. He walked to the door, keeping the rifle low, out of sight. He unbolted the heavy deadbolt and slowly, carefully, opened the door just a crack. A blast of cold air, laden with snowflakes, rushed into the cabin. The man outside was indeed heavily bundled. He was older than Elias, perhaps in his late 50s, with a grizzled beard frosted with ice and kind, crinkling eyes that peered out from under the brim of a worn trapper hat. His face was weathered, crisscrossed with lines etched by years of sun and wind. "Well now," Mac said, a broad smile spreading across his face, revealing a missing front tooth. "You actually made it, son. Silas always said you were stubborn as a mule." Elias kept the rifle pointed at the floor, but ready. "Who are you?" "Mac O'Malley," the man repeated, extending a gloved hand. "Silas and I, we were old friends, practically brothers. Knew him since the 1970s. He talked about you, Elias, always worried about you." Elias looked at the outstretched hand, then back at the man's face. Mac seemed genuine, but Elias's instincts were screaming caution. The world had not been kind to him, teaching him to trust no one easily. Ghost, who had been standing protectively behind Elias, let out a low, questioning growl. It wasn't aggressive, more a deep, rumbling query. "And who is this handsome fellow?" Mac asked, his eyes crinkling further as he looked at Ghost. "Heard you had a war dog with you. Good for you, son. Always keep your best friend close." "What do you want?" Elias asked, ignoring the offered handshake. Mac lowered his hand, his smile not wavering. "Want? Goodness, boy. I just want to make sure you ain't frozen. Sheriff Miller asked me to check on you. Plus," he patted a large canvas pack strapped to his snowmobile, "I brought supplies, food, coffee, whiskey. Real whiskey, not that rot-gut Silas used to keep for guests." Elias's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. He hadn't eaten a full meal in days. "You can come in," Elias said, stepping aside, "but no funny business." He still kept the rifle within reach. Mac chuckled. "Funny business? Boy, I am too old and too cold for funny business. Just looking for a warm spot and a cup of coffee. Don't mind if I do. He stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. He took off his hat, revealing a shock of thinning gray hair. "Phew, Silas always did keep this place like an icebox. You got a fire going, though? Good man." Mac walked over to the hearth, rubbing his hands together. He glanced at the tent in the middle of the living room, then back at Elias, a thoughtful expression on his face. "So, you came all this way in that old truck? In this storm?" Mac asked, his eyes keen. "I had to," Elias said. "Deadline." "Aye, the deadline," Mac nodded. Silas loved his deadlines, and his tests. Elias frowned. "Tests?" Mac sat down on a dusty armchair near the fireplace, making himself comfortable. "Elias, I have to tell you something. I wasn't just driving by, and the sheriff didn't just ask me to check on you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I have been watching you since before dawn, son, from the tree line up the road. My snowmobile was parked way back, out of sight." Elias felt a surge of anger. He had been spied on. "Silas left instructions for me," Mac continued, unfazed by Elias's reaction. "Said if a young man named Elias Thorne showed up, I was to observe him. He called it the character test." Elias stared, dumbfounded. "He said to watch what you did when you hit the snow, how you treated the kid, how you treated the dog." Mac's gaze was steady, piercing. "I saw your truck get stuck. I saw you carry the little one up here first, all bundled up, safe and sound." Mac paused, looking at Ghost, who had now limped over to Elias and sat beside him, his head resting on Elias's knee. "Then," Mac said, "I saw you go back down that road. In that blizzard, through that deep snow. I saw you carry that big dog on your shoulders, like he was your own flesh and blood. You didn't leave him in the truck, even though he was a heavy load. You brought him up here." Elias felt a blush creep up his neck. He hadn't thought anyone was watching. He had just done what needed to be done. "And when you got inside," Mac continued, "I saw you through the window. You didn't start tearing the place apart looking for gold. You built a fire. You fixed that hole in the roof that Silas never bothered to patch. You set up a tent in the living room for the little one. You were worried about their warmth, their safety. You weren't worried about the treasure." Mac leaned back, a satisfied smile on his face. Silas said if you did all that, it meant you passed the test. He said it meant you were a good man, Elias. A real soldier, not just a killer. Someone who understood duty, loyalty, and putting your own last. Elias felt a strange mix of emotions, embarrassment, but also a deep, unexpected sense of validation. He hadn't realized he was being judged, but he had, apparently, measured up. He said you were the one, Elias, the one worthy of everything he had, the one who wouldn't be corrupted by it. Mac paused, then said, "And he wanted me to make sure you got the full story about that bastard Vincent." "I just called Sterling," Elias said. "He is filing an injunction. Vincent won't get within a mile of this place." "Good," Mac nodded approvingly. "Silas always said you were smart, but he wanted me to be your witness too, in case Vincent tries any more funny business. You need a local, someone who knows these mountains, who knows Silas's will, who saw it all. And I saw it, Elias. I saw you fight that storm like a demon. I saw you carry that dog like he was a king. I saw you protect that little girl. I will testify to all of it, in any court, any time." Mac stood up, walking to his snowmobile. He returned with a large cooler and a canvas bag. He set them down on the table. "Here, hot coffee in the thermos, some venison jerky I made myself, and some fresh sourdough bread. Lily will like the hot chocolate I packed." He opened a small compartment on his snowmobile and pulled out a heavy-duty shovel and a roll of black tarp. "And this, we are going to need to dig out your truck in the morning, and that tarp will make a good temporary patch for that hole in the roof until the storm fully passes." Elias looked at the food, then at the man. Mac O'Malley was a stranger, yet he had acted with a loyalty that Elias hadn't seen since his days in the Corps. Silas, in his strange, reclusive wisdom, had left him not just a fortune, but a true ally. "Thank you, Mac," Elias said, his voice raw with a newfound gratitude. "Thank you." Mac simply nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Anytime, son. Anytime. Now, how about that coffee? I have a feeling we have a long night ahead, waiting for that blizzard to blow itself out." Elias nodded, a small, genuine smile finally touching his lips. He poured a cup of coffee for Mac, then one for himself. Ghost nudged his hand, asking for a share of the venison jerky. Elias broke off a piece, watching the dog crunch on it with satisfaction. The storm outside still raged, but inside, the cabin had grown warmer, not just from the fire, but from the presence of a new, unexpected ally. Elias had not just survived, he had found a comrade. The squad was growing. The storm had broken. After 2 days of howling fury, the sun rose over the Beartooth Mountains with a blinding, crystalline brilliance. The world was buried under 3 feet of fresh, pristine white. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic scraping of a shovel. Elias stood on the porch, his breath puffing in the frigid morning air. He had been up since dawn, working alongside Mac to clear a path from the cabin door to the driveway. The physical labor felt good. It grounded him. It burned off the adrenaline that had been coursing through his veins since the phone call with Sterling. Inside the cabin, the fire was roaring. The smell of Mac's coffee and the sourdough bread toast filled the air. It felt like a home. But the peace was fragile. Around 10 in the morning, the silence of the mountain was shattered by the roar of engines. Elias stopped shoveling, leaning on the handle. He watched as 2 vehicles plowed their way up the freshly cleared county road. The lead vehicle was a heavy-duty SUV emblazoned with the sheriff's star. Following closely behind was Vincent's black luxury car, looking out of place and predatory against the backdrop of the snow-covered pines. "Here they come," Mac said, spitting into the snow. He adjusted his cap and moved to stand beside Elias. "Remember what we talked about. Keep your cool." "I am cool," Elias said, though his hand instinctively went to the dog tags beneath his shirt. The vehicles pulled into the cleared area near the cabin. The doors opened. Vincent stepped out first. He was dressed in a pristine wool coat and designer sunglasses, looking every inch the grieving, concerned relative. He didn't look at Elias. He looked at the sheriff. Sheriff Miller was a big man, built like a slab of granite. He wore a thick, shearling-lined jacket over his uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was unreadable, etched with the kind of lines that come from seeing too much of the worst parts of human nature. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait. "Sheriff," Vincent said, his voice loud and projecting urgency. "Thank you for coming so quickly. As I told you on the phone, I have grave concerns. My cousin is unstable. He has dragged a 4-year-old child into a condemned shack in the middle of a blizzard. I haven't heard from them in days. I fear the worst." Miller nodded once, not looking at Vincent, but fixing his gaze on Elias. "Mr. Thorne?" "That is me," Elias said, stepping off the porch. He stood at attention, his posture rigid. "This is my property, Sheriff, and we are fine." "Fine," Vincent scoffed, stepping forward aggressively. "Look at this place. It is a ruin. There is no electricity, no running water. He has a child in there, Sheriff. This is child endangerment, plain and simple. I want him removed, and I want custody of the girl until social services can step in." Miller held up a hand to silence Vincent. He walked up to Elias. "I need to perform a welfare check, son. I need to see the girl and the condition of the living quarters." "Understood," Elias said. "You are welcome to enter." Vincent pushed past the sheriff, seizing the opportunity. "I am coming too. I need to see my niece." "Stay back, Vincent," Elias warned, his voice dropping an octave. "I have a right," Vincent shouted, reaching for the door handle. Before Elias could move, the door pushed open from the inside. Ghost stepped out. The German shepherd moved with a stiffness in his hind leg, the cold still bothering the old shrapnel injury, but his head was high. He placed himself squarely between Vincent and the open door. He did not bark. He simply lowered his head, his ears pinned back, and let out a low, vibrating rumble that shook the air. His amber eyes were locked on Vincent's throat. Vincent yelped and stumbled backward, slipping on a patch of ice. He flailed his arms and fell heavily into the snowbank. "He bit me!" Vincent screamed, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, his face twisted in a mask of theatrical terror. "Did you see that? That animal attacked me. He is vicious. Shoot him, Sheriff. He is a danger to the child." Elias took a step forward. "He didn't touch you, Vincent. He is holding the line." "He lunged at me," Vincent lied, pointing a shaking finger. "Look at him. That is a killer dog. If he does that to me, imagine what he does to a 4-year-old. This proves it, Sheriff. He is keeping a dangerous animal around a toddler. That is negligence." Miller's hand rested on his holster, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the dog. Ghost had not pursued Vincent. He had simply stood his ground, his body rigid, guarding the threshold. "Elias," Miller said sternly, "control your animal." "Ghost, heel," Elias said softly. Immediately the growl ceased. Ghost turned and sat beside Elias's leg, pressing his shoulder against Elias's thigh. He looked up at the sheriff, his expression calm and alert. Before Miller could speak again, a small voice drifted from the doorway. "Mr. Policeman?" Miller looked down. Lily was standing in the doorway. She was still wearing the red woolen dress, her hair messy from sleep, holding a small stuffed bear. She looked from Vincent, who was brushing snow off his expensive coat, to the imposing figure of the sheriff. She didn't look scared. She looked curious. Miller's face softened. He knelt down in the snow, so he was eye level with her. "Hello there, young lady. I am Sheriff Miller. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. It was a big storm last night." "It was loud," Lily admitted, stepping out onto the porch. She walked right past Vincent as if he didn't exist and stood next to Ghost. She rested her hand on the dog's head, burying her fingers in his thick fur. "But Daddy made it fun." Vincent stood up, his face red. "Lily, honey, are you hurt? Is it cold in there? Did the dog scare you?" Lily frowned at him. "No, Ghost is my pillow." She looked back at the sheriff. "Daddy made a fort inside, a big tent. It was warm and—" She paused, looking up at Elias with pure adoration. "And Ghost's leg hurt because of the cold snow. so Daddy gave him his big green blanket. Daddy slept in his coat so Ghost wouldn't be cold. The silence that followed was profound. Vincent's mouth opened and closed, his narrative of a cruel, negligent madman crumbling under the weight of a 4-year-old's honesty. "He gave the dog his blanket?" Miller repeated, looking up at Elias. "We take care of our own," Elias said simply. Miller stood up. "I would like to see inside, Mr. Thorne." Elias nodded and stepped aside. Miller walked into the cabin. He expected to see squalor. He expected to see the chaotic mess of a man unraveling. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The living room was small and rustic, but it was immaculate. The floor had been swept. The gear was not thrown around. It was stacked with geometric precision against the wall. The tent in the center of the room, the fort, was set up perfectly. The sleeping bags inside rolled tight or laid out flat without a wrinkle. The fire was built correctly, drawing smoke up the chimney with no backdraft. It wasn't a mess. It was a bivouac. It was a field command post established by a man who knew how to create order out of chaos. Miller's eyes swept the room and landed on Elias's tactical backpack, resting on a chair. It was worn, faded olive drab. Velcroed to the front panel was a patch. It was frayed at the edges, but the design was unmistakable. The Southern Cross, the 1st Marine Division, the Blue Diamond. Miller stared at the patch for a long moment. Then he looked at the dog, an older German shepherd with a visible limp and the discipline of a soldier. Then he looked at Elias standing straight, his hands calm, his eyes clear and protective. Miller felt a familiar ache in his own knee, a reminder of his time in the Army Rangers, decades ago. He knew what he was looking at. He wasn't looking at a bum, he was looking at a brother. He turned back to the door. Vincent was hovering in the entrance, looking smug. "Well," Vincent demanded, "it is a disaster, right? You see the danger?" Miller adjusted his hat. His voice was flat and hard. "Mr. Thorne, I see a warm structure. I see plenty of food. I see a healthy, happy child. And I see a secure environment." "Secure?" Vincent spluttered. "There is a vicious animal in there." "I see a well-trained service animal," Miller corrected him sharply. "And I see a father who knows how to survive. This is a welfare check, Vincent, not an eviction service. There is no crime here. The child is safe." "But the deadline?" Vincent grasped at straws. "He had to be here by—" "He is here," Miller cut him off. "He is occupying the residence. As far as the law is concerned, he is the resident. If you have a dispute about the will, that is a civil matter. Take it to court." Vincent's face turned a shade of purple. He looked from the sheriff to Elias, realizing he had lost this skirmish. The storm hadn't killed them, the cold hadn't broken them, and his lies hadn't worked. "This isn't over, Elias," Vincent hissed, stepping off the porch. "I have lawyers, expensive ones. I will bury you in paperwork. I will take this land, and I will take that girl." "Get off my property, Vincent," Elias said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Vincent stormed back to his car, slamming the door so hard the snow on the roof slid off. He peeled out, his tires spinning angrily before catching traction. Sheriff Miller watched him go, then turned back to Elias. The professional mask slipped for just a second. He looked Elias in the eye and gave a single, sharp nod. It was the universal language of those who have served. It meant, "I see you. I know." He walked past Elias down the steps. As he passed, he paused, leaning in close so Lily couldn't hear. "Be ready, brother," Miller whispered, his voice low and gravelly. "He has money, and he is embarrassed. That is a dangerous combination. He will be back tomorrow with a court order." Elias nodded. "I will be ready." "Good luck, Marine." Miller walked to his SUV, the snow crunching under his heavy boots. Elias watched him drive away, leaving the mountain silent once more. He felt a tug on his pant leg. Lily was looking up at him, clutching her bear. "Did we win, Daddy?" Elias looked down at her, then at Ghost, who was leaning against his leg, solid and warm. He reached into his shirt and touched the 2 sets of dog tags, his own and Silas's. "We won the first round, Lilybug," Elias said, scooping her up into his arms. "But the fight isn't over. Let's go get some hot chocolate." He carried her back inside, Ghost limping faithfully behind them, and closed the door against the cold. The Carbon County Courthouse in Red Lodge was a structure of red brick and sandstone that had stood against the Montana winters for over a century. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax, old paper, and the heavy, oppressive weight of judgment. Elias sat at the defendant's table, his hands folded calmly on the polished wood. He wore his only suit, a charcoal gray ensemble he had bought for his wife's funeral 3 years ago. It was slightly tight across the shoulders, a reminder that he had carried heavy burdens since then. Beside him sat Arthur Sterling. The lawyer was a sharp contrast to the rustic setting. He wore a tailored navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, his demeanor radiating a predatory confidence. At his feet lay Ghost. The German shepherd wore a red vest marked "Service Animal." He lay perfectly still, his chin resting on his front paws, though his amber eyes tracked every movement in the room. Despite the warmth of the building, the dog favored his right hind leg, tucking it carefully beneath his body. Across the aisle sat Vincent. He looked impeccable in cashmere and Italian leather, whispering urgently to his attorney, a local man named Mr. Finch who looked nervous. The Honorable Judge Lawrence Gable entered the room. He was an older man with a face like a topographic map of the Badlands, deeply lined and stern. The bailiff announced the court was in session. "We are here to hear the emergency motion for custody regarding the minor, Lily Thorne, and the contest regarding the estate of Silas Thorne," Judge Gable said, his voice gravelly. "Mr. Finch, you may proceed." Vincent's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we are not here to dispute the affection Mr. Elias Thorne has for his daughter. We are here to dispute his capacity. The defendant is a destitute veteran with a documented history of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He was evicted from his home mere days ago. He then recklessly drove a 4-year-old child into a historic blizzard to live in a derelict cabin with no utilities." Finch paced the floor, his voice rising theatrically. "We have medical records, Your Honor, obtained through discovery. They detail night terrors, hypervigilance, and dissociation. Mr. Thorne is a ticking time bomb. Is this the environment for a child? An isolated mountain shack with a man who is mentally unstable and a large, aggressive attack dog? We move that custody be granted immediately to Mr. Vincent Thorne, the child's cousin, who can provide a stable, affluent home." Elias felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the shame, the anger. They were taking his scars, the wounds he had earned fighting for his country, and twisting them into a weapon to steal his daughter. He looked toward the back of the courtroom. Mac O'Malley sat there, wearing his Sunday best flannel. Next to him sat Lily, coloring in a book, oblivious to the war being fought over her life. "Mr. Thorne?" The judge was addressing him. Elias stood up slowly. "Is it true, Mr. Thorne? Do you suffer from PTSD?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice steady and clear. "I served 2 tours as a Marine Scout sniper. I saw things that broke better men than me. I have nightmares. My hands shake sometimes." "And does this make you dangerous?" Vincent interrupted, unable to wait for his lawyer. He stood up, pointing a finger at Elias. "Admit it. You are broken. You dragged that girl into a death trap because you cannot function in the real world. You are crazy, Elias. Everyone knows it." "Sit down, Mr. Vincent Thorne," Judge Gable warned. But Vincent was losing control. The humiliation of the encounter at the cabin, the exhaustion of the storm, and the arrogance of his wealth boiled over. He stepped out from behind the table, his face flushing red. "I will not sit down. This is ridiculous. He is a vagrant with a gun and a wolf. He put my niece in danger. He threatened me. Look at him. He is barely holding it together." Vincent lunged forward, shouting, his arms flailing in a display of unchecked aggression. "You are unfit, Elias. You are a menace." The courtroom went silent, waiting for the explosion. They expected the unstable veteran to snap. They expected violence. Instead, there was only movement from the floor. Ghost stood up. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He moved with the fluid, silent precision of a professional soldier. He stepped in front of Elias, placing his 80-pound body directly between his handler and the shouting man. He executed a perfect block-and-cover maneuver. Ghost pressed his side firmly against Elias's legs, grounding him while his head remained high, eyes locked on Vincent. He stood like a statue, a wall of fur and muscle. He absorbed the aggression in the room, filtering it so it could not reach Elias. The contrast was breathtaking. On one side was Vincent, wealthy, privileged, screaming, face distorted with rage, acting like a feral animal. On the other side was Ghost, the vicious attack dog, standing with absolute discipline, calm and controlled. And behind the dog stood Elias, his hand resting gently on Ghost's head, his face a mask of stoic sorrow. "I may have nightmares, Vincent," Elias said softly, his voice carrying through the silent room. "But I do not scream at children, and I do not lose control. My trauma taught me how to protect the things I love. What has your greed taught you?" Vincent froze, realizing the entire room was staring at him. The judge's eyes were wide, fixed on the disciplined dog and the frantic man. "Mr. Finch," Judge Gable said, his voice dangerously low. "Control your client before I hold him in contempt." "Gee," Vincent sank back into his chair, adjusting his suit, but the damage was done. The narrative of the crazy veteran had just shattered against the reality of the crazy man in the expensive suit. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "call your witness." Arthur Sterling stood up, smoothing his jacket. "I do not need a witness, Your Honor. I have a piece of evidence that clarifies the timeline of events." Sterling walked to the bench, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a crumpled, water-stained envelope. The plaintiff argues that Mr. Elias Thorne recklessly waited until the last minute, driving into a storm to claim the inheritance. He argues that this shows poor judgment. Sterling turned to look at Vincent, a shark-like smile appearing. "However, this is the notification letter sent by my firm. It was sent via certified mail to Mr. Vincent Thorne, who was the executor of the mail at the time. Your Honor, please look at the postmark date stamped in red ink by the United States Postal Service." Judge Gable took the bag. He adjusted his glasses. "October 12th. "Exactly," Sterling said. "And what date did Mr. Vincent Thorne hand-deliver this letter to my client?" "November 10th, Elias said from his table. "That is a gap of 28 days, Sterling boomed, his voice filling the room. "The will stipulated a 30-day window to claim the property. Vincent Thorne held this letter for 4 weeks. He waited until there were only 48 hours left. He checked the weather reports. He saw the blizzard coming. And then, and only then, did he deliver the news." A gasp rippled through the small gallery. Sterling leaned on the railing. "This was not negligence, Your Honor. This was a trap. It was calculated malice. It was bad faith designed to force a default on the inheritance so that he could steal the estate from a grieving father and his child. He didn't care if Elias died in that storm. In fact, he was counting on it." Vincent turned pale. He looked at his lawyer, but Finch was staring at the desk, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. Judge Gable stared at the postmark for a long time. When he looked up, his expression was terrifying. The lines on his face seemed to deepen into fissures of granite. "Mr. Vincent Thorne," the judge said, his voice quiet and trembling with suppressed rage. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many things. I have seen greed, I have seen stupidity, but I have rarely seen such a cowardly, despicable attempt to manipulate the legal system to endanger a child." "Your Honor, Vincent stammered. "Silence." The word cracked like a whip. Judge Gable slammed the file shut. "The plaintiff's motion for emergency custody is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, I am upholding the will of Silas Thorne in its entirety. Mr. Elias Thorne met the requirements of the claim despite the criminal interference of the plaintiff." The judge leaned forward. "And Mr. Vincent, do not leave town. Tampering with U.S. mail to commit fraud is a federal offense. I am forwarding this transcript and this envelope to the District Attorney and the Postmaster General. I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one." The wooden gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp, final report that echoed like a gunshot. Case dismissed. The tension in Elias's body snapped. He let out a breath he felt he had been holding for days. He looked down at Ghost. The dog looked up, his tail giving a single, slow wag, as if to say, "Mission accomplished." "We did it," Elias whispered, rubbing the dog's ears. From the back of the room there was a scuffling sound. Lily ran down the aisle, escaping Mac's grasp. She ducked under the barrier and launched herself at Elias. He caught her, lifting her high into the air. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Did the bad man go away?" she whispered. Elias looked over Lily's shoulder. Vincent was being escorted out by the bailiff, looking small and defeated. He looked at Mac, who gave him a thumbs up and a wide, toothless grin. He looked at Sheriff Miller, who was standing by the door, offering a slow, respectful salute. "Yes, baby," Elias said, his voice thick with tears he refused to shed. "The bad man is gone. We are going home." He set her down. Ghost nudged Lily's hand and she giggled. Elias walked out of the courthouse into the bright, cold Montana sunlight. The air tasted clean. The weight on his chest, the eviction, the poverty, the fear, was gone. He adjusted the dog tags under his shirt. He felt light. He felt free. For the first time since he took off the uniform, the war was truly over. Winter released its grip on the Beartooth Mountains slowly, retreating inch by inch as the sun grew stronger. The blinding white blanket that had buried the world for months thinned, revealing the dark, rich earth beneath. The silence of the snow was replaced by the music of the thaw, the dripping of icicles, the rush of the creek swelling with meltwater, and the return of the birds singing in the pines. Elias Thorne sat at the metal desk in the bunker beneath the living room floor. The air down here was no longer stale. He had installed a proper ventilation system. The room was no longer a tomb of hoarded wealth, but an office of operations. Open before him was the ledger. He had spent the last 2 weeks doing math. It was not a calculation of greed, but of atonement. He traced his finger down to the entry dated June 12, 1985. Settlement from injury, $15,000. This was the seed money, the blood money Silas had received after the mining accident that had taken his family. Silas had invested it, grown it, and let it multiply, but he had never spent a dime of the principal. He had considered it cursed. Elias pulled a checkbook from the drawer. It was drawn on a new trust account he had established with Arthur Sterling's help. He wrote a check. The amount was calculated carefully, the original $15,000, adjusted for 40 years of inflation and interest. It was a significant sum. He made it payable to the Red Lodge Miners Memorial Fund, with a specific instruction that it be used for scholarships for the children of those lost in the industry. He tore the check from the book with a sharp ripping sound. He placed it in an envelope. There was no return address. It would be an anonymous donation. The debt was paid. The curse was broken. "That cleans the slate, Silas," Elias whispered to the empty room. "The rest is for the living." He turned his attention to the stack of blueprints spread out on the desk. They were plans for the Hearthstone Fund. Elias was not keeping the gold to buy sports cars or villas. He was building something. The 50 acres of mountain land were being repurposed. He had already hired a contractor, Mac's nephew, to begin renovating the old barn into a kennel facility. The mission was simple: rescue dogs from shelters, specifically the unadoptable ones, the broken ones, the ones with trauma, train them, and then pair them with veterans returning home with PTSD who needed a reason to get out of bed in the morning: housing, purpose, brotherhood. It was what Elias had needed. It was what Silas had needed. Now Elias would provide it for others. He closed the ledger and climbed the ladder, emerging into the bright, sunlit living room. The cabin had changed. The drafty windows were sealed. The roof was fixed. The dust was gone, replaced by colorful rugs and the chaotic, happy clutter of a childhood in progress. "Daddy!" The shout came from the bedroom. It wasn't a happy shout. It was a cry of frustration. Elias walked down the hall. "What is the matter, Lilybug?" He pushed the door open. Lily was standing in front of the mirror. She was trying to zip up the red woolen dress. Her face was flushed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She twisted her body, trying to force the zipper up, but the fabric was pulled tight across her shoulders and chest. "It is stuck," Lily complained, her voice wobbling. "I want to wear it for the picnic with Mr. Mack, but it hurts. It is squeezing me." Elias froze in the doorway. He looked at his daughter. She had grown. The winter had seen her shoot up 2 inches. Her baby fat was thinning out, replaced by the lanky energy of a growing girl. The sleeves of the red dress, which used to cover her hands, now stopped above her wrists. The hem, which used to drag on the floor, was now high on her shins. For months, Elias had put her in this dress every time they went somewhere important. It was his armor for her. It was his way of wrapping her in Sarah's love. He had clung to the image of her in that red wool because it was the closest thing he had to seeing his wife again. "Daddy, help me," Lily pleaded, turning around. Elias walked over and knelt behind her. He took the zipper tab between his fingers. He tried to pull it up, but the teeth separated. The fabric was taut. "It is too small, baby," Elias said softly. "But it is Mama's dress," Lily said, looking at him in the mirror. "I have to wear it. You said it keeps me safe." Elias looked at his own reflection. He looked younger than he had in years. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. The lines of constant worry had smoothed out. He looked down at his daughter. She wasn't a baby anymore. She was a child running toward the future, and he was tethering her to a ghost. He realized then that holding on too tight wasn't protecting her. It was restricting her, just like the dress. "No, Lily," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "The dress didn't keep you safe. I did. We did." He gently unzipped the dress. "Take it off, sweetie." Lily let the heavy wool pool around her feet. She stepped out of it, standing there in her undershirt, looking small and vulnerable, but free. Elias picked up the dress. It felt heavy in his hands, weighted with memory. He folded it. He didn't just wad it up. He folded it with the precision of a flag ceremony, sleeve to sleeve, hem to collar. He walked over to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. He opened it. Inside were Sarah's things, her favorite book, a dried flower from their wedding, and a framed photograph of her laughing. Elias placed the folded red dress inside, right next to the photo. "It is time to let it rest," Elias said. "It did its job. It got us through the storm." He closed the lid. The latch clicked shut with a sound of finality. It wasn't a sad sound. It was the sound of a chapter ending. "But what will I wear?" Lily asked. Elias smiled. "Wait right here." He went to the hallway closet and pulled out a box he had hidden there 2 days ago. He brought it back and handed it to her. Lily tore the paper open. Inside was a dress of soft cotton. It was green, the bright, vibrant green of new leaves in spring, the color of life returning to the mountains. It had sunflowers embroidered on the hem. "Green!" Lily squealed. "Like the grass." "Like the spring," Elias corrected. She pulled it on. It fit perfectly. It was loose enough for her to run, to jump, to grow. She spun around, the skirt flaring out. "Do you like it?" Elias asked. "I love it." She threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy." Elias hugged her back, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like sunshine and shampoo, not like the past. "Okay, go put your shoes on. Mac is waiting." Lily ran out of the room, a blur of green energy. Elias stood for a moment longer, looking at the closed cedar chest. He touched the wood lightly. "I got her, Sarah," he whispered. "I promise. I got her." He turned and walked out of the house, stepping onto the front porch. The transformation of the property was miraculous. The snow was gone, except for the highest peaks. The valley was a lush carpet of emerald. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. Down by the driveway, Mac's truck was parked. Mac was unloading a cooler, laughing as Lily ran circles around him. But it was the sight on the porch that made Elias stop. Ghost was lying in a patch of sunlight that streamed through the porch railing. The German shepherd, who for years had slept curled in a tight ball, nose tucked to tail, ready to spring up at the snap of a twig, was sprawled out on his back. His legs were splayed in the air. His soft, vulnerable belly was exposed to the world. His head was thrown back, his tongue lolling out sideways. He was fast asleep. Elias watched him. Usually, when Ghost slept, he twitched. He would whimper, his paws running in place, chasing phantoms in the smoke of his dreams. Today, Ghost was still. His breathing was deep and rhythmic. His ribcage rose and fell in a slow, peaceful cadence. There were no demons in his sleep. He was just a dog, soaking up the sun. Elias felt a tightness in his chest loosen, a knot that had been there since Kandahar finally untying. The war was over. The enemy had retreated. The perimeter was secure. He sat down on the top step, close enough to touch Ghost, but careful not to wake him. He took a sip of his coffee, watching Lily run through the tall grass in her green dress. She tripped, fell, laughed, and got back up. Elias reached under his shirt and pulled out the 2 sets of dog tags, his own and Silas's. The metal was warm from the sun. He didn't need to hide in a bunker anymore. He didn't need to run into a storm to feel alive. He had built a house of the heart, right here on the foundation of his uncle's sorrow, turning it into a fortress of hope. Ghost let out a soft, snoring puff of air, his lip fluttering. Elias smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. "Sleep well, buddy," he whispered to the dog. "We are home." Elias leaned back against the porch post, closing his eyes for just a moment, listening to the sound of his daughter's laughter carried on the gentle spring breeze. The ghosts were gone. Only the living remained. Elias and Ghost remind us that true wealth is never found in cold gold bars hidden beneath the floor, but in the courage to face our storms and the loyalty of those who stand by us when the world goes dark. If their journey toward peace touched your heart today, please share your thoughts with us in the comments and consider subscribing to help our community of storytellers grow. We have another tale of resilience and hope waiting for you right now, so please click the video appearing on your screen to continue the journey with us.